Good afternoon, viewers. Today I will discuss the first act of Dr. Faustus. The first act has a number of scenes. As I already mentioned, Dr. Faustus, like no other play in English drama, represents the element of transition from the medieval church religious drama and the influence of Greek classical drama, tragedy in particular, and the expression of the Renaissance feeling. It is a transitional play and stands as a threshold of the greatness of English drama, which is to reach its full possibility and expression in the age of Shakespeare. Marlowe was a part of the Oxford wits, who are known as the pre-Shakespearean dramatists. Let us come to Dr. Faustus Act I. As the influence of the Greek tragedy is visible in the very first lines, which are spoken by the chorus and which form the prologue of this tragedy, which talks about the myth of Icarus, a figure from Greek mythology who came to an ignoble death because of his over ambition and his over assumption. This sets the tone of the play. The elements of the morality plays, the religious drama, is present in the theme of temptation, sin, and damnation. The figure of the central protagonist, that is Dr. Faustus, is an expression of the Renaissance spirit of desire, ability, ambition, achievement, and an overconfidence. A feeling that one is on the threshold of greatness, and greatness is within the grasp of man. This was the beginning of the age of humanism. And in the 16th century, the Renaissance had come, or it had begun its full flow by the mid 16th century. The influence of Renaissance is very visible, and certainly Dr. Faustus is a Renaissance play, and English drama, as we all know, made its mark first in the form of the tragedy, or which is Gorboduc. Now the prologue. The chorus is an influence of Greek drama, because in the Greek tragedies, the chorus always introduces the theme, marks of the theme, and in the end, it analyzes the theme and gives the moral lesson. So the chorus introduces the play. Let us come to scene 1 of Act 1. Here we see Faustus alone, because later on, as the play progresses, this element of isolation, this element of Faustus being an isolated figure, becomes more and more pronounced. The first lines by Faustus are in the form of a soliloquy, because blank verse has showed its power. It has formed a perfect vehicle for expression in Marlowe's plays, and later on, of course, Shakespearean drama. So as we meet Faustus, we find him in his studies, and this long soliloquy is like his monologue, in which he speaks his thoughts and what he feels. The lines go on, and as we read the lines, certain facts are very obvious. The use of words. Faustus has begun by saying or showing an interest in the different branches of knowledge. As the lines move on, we find his confidence almost overbearing when he takes up one subject after the other and discards them, saying that he has mastered them all. Here, the expression of the confidence, almost bordering on arrogance, is very, very visible. Another factor which is repeated and which makes itself felt very, very prominently is the fact that there is a physical uh, flavor running through all his intellectual pursuits. It is in the choice of the words. Within the first few lines, he uses words like ravished. Ravished is a word which is used in terms of a physical experience, and it borders on sensuousness or sensuality. So, the element of this physical desire, this sensual uh, part of Faustus's nature, which is a part of his or different from his intellectual capabilities, is made very, very clear. Another is the line or the refrain which comes again and again, and which exhibits or which expresses the real reason for Faustus's present dissatisfaction, his restlessness, and his desire to know something more than what he already knows, something which is not for an ordinary mortal to know. And this line, which expresses his discontent, is, "Yet art thou still but Faustus and a man." The fact that he is a man is something which rankles him. It is something which makes him conscious of the limitations of mortality. And he wishes to be something more than a man. He wishes to compete with God. He wishes to break the boundaries. He wishes to achieve the impossible. He wants to know everything which is not for him to know. He is not ready to accept any boundaries. And this is his sin, his overambition, and his desire to be almost a godlike figure. And this wish was again a very Renaissance feeling which had come after the darkness of the medieval ages, when man was constantly made aware of his limitation, his imperfection, his mortality, his sinfulness. Now, with the advent of humanism, the magnificence of man is something which is the foremost feeling, and this feeling had come in with a renewed vigor and force during the age of Renaissance. And Marlowe's Dr. Faustus and Marlowe himself, they definitely were men who were almost supermen. This idea of man being almost a godlike figure is also present in the Greek tragedies, but being tragedies, they always show even these great men, these supermen, these godlike men, come to a tragic end because of some fatal flaw which makes them imperfect. So man is not a perfect creature, yet he desires that perfection. Man is not an immortal creature, but he desires that immortality. And here Faustus wishes for it in a very strong way. That is the driving force in his nature. And as he looks through the subjects, discards them one after the other, we get an impression of a man who is too intelligent not to know what he wants. He is just buying time, and he is just trying to convince himself in a half-hearted manner as to what he really wants. He has not said it clearly, but as the lines move on, he is coming to that point. He reasons with himself. He looks at the books of divinity, having discarded law, medicine, theology, philosophy, everything as not suited to his intellect. He has already achieved more than other men do in their lifetimes. He looks at divinity, and the first line which catches his attention is, "The reward of sin is death." That's hard. So the fact that divinity does not promise him something eternal, something everlasting, it does not give him some emotional and mental stimulation, is something which he cannot accept, And so he says that this is hard. Why should I look forward to only death? Why should I look to bleakness and negativity? And then, having convinced himself, he comes to the point which is already in his heart, because he's too intelligent a man not to know what he wants. And so he says, since we must, again lines, we must die an everlasting death. What doctrine call you this? Que sera sera. And he knows that death is the ultimate. We already know this. So what will be, will be. What kind of knowledge is this? Which tells me something which I already know and I do not desire to know more. And then he finally, the turning point comes when he admits the truth to himself, and he says, and necromantic books are heavenly. Again, this points to a psychological factor, how in his mind the values have been inverted. He calls the necromantic books, that is the books of black magic and devil worship, heavenly. So in his twisted mind, in his inverted values, in his world which has already become topsy-turvy, where he is putting the emphasis on the wrong things, necromancy or black magic has become heavenly. What is hell has become heavenly. His values have become inverted. But finally he is honest with himself and he says, yea, these are those that Faustus most desires. This is the turning point in the first long soliloquy. Till now, the lines have been moving slowly, heavily almost, as Faustus is playing a game with himself. He is buying time, and they move with a certain heaviness. But at this turning point, when he admits to himself finally that these necromantic books are heavenly, this is what has ravished me, this is what has captivated my mind, and I will turn to it. And from these lines 51, when he finally admits the truth to himself, the remaining lines of the soliloquy, they move with a sudden force, as if Marlowe's imagination has taken wings. The lines move with a beauty, with a passion, with a new feeling. The lines before this, Faustus has been desultory. He has looked at, or he said things half-heartedly. He's not been honest with himself. But now, finally, when he has admitted what he wants, it seems as if his imagination has taken wings. And these lines express the desire to achieve the impossible, to become a godlike figure, to give full reins to imagination, to achieve everything one can think of, to become almost godlike, because he says a sound magician is a mighty god. And then finally, here Faustus, tire thy brains to get a deity. And then there's a sense of relief after the passion and the music of the lines, in which he tells himself of all that he wants, and the lines move with a sonorous power. He finally has accepted to himself as what his desires are, and the lines move, or they flow, and they express a beauty of imagination, which again points out to this feeling of renaissance, this feeling of glory, this feeling of the possibilities of man, this feeling of a limitless world where the imagination can go anywhere, and man can achieve anything. Man is not a puny, sylvan creature. And then he calls his servant to assist him by sending a message to two famous magicians who will instruct him in the process of achieving knowledge of black magic. And then at this point we find a remnant of the religious drama present, because this play, Dr. Faustus, is a curious mixture of all these different elements. It is just emerging from the medieval age religious drama. And then at this juncture, the good angel and bad angel. There are two, we can say, the dramatic machinery which were a part of the religious drama, because they always had the theme, the religious theme of temptation, sin, and damnation. This play also is based on this idea, on the legend of a very renowned scholar selling his soul to the devil in return for knowledge. Knowledge which was not for him to possess, it was forbidden knowledge. And we can imagine that in the 16th century, to witness on the stage a person willingly surrendering his soul, the immortal soul, to the devil, to evil, must have been a very horrifying idea and a very horrifying scene to witness the superstitious minds. Because heaven and hell and evil and Satan and Lucifer, they were actual realities in their mind, the physical realities. And here, when the good angel and the evil angel appear, they speak the lines. Again, we find the difference, because when the good angel speaks and urges Faustus to not go forward in this black magic, not to tempt fate, not to ransom his soul, not to do something which will lead him to damnation. The lines are very passive, they are quite expressionless, they are quite dry. While when the evil angel urges Faustus to listen to his desires, to do what he wishes to do, those lines are more powerful. Many critics say that Dr. Faustus represents Marlowe himself, who was a rebel, who lived an unconventional life, who made his own rules, and who lived on the edge. So these, we already know that Faustus, in his Faustus's mind, the values are inverted. Hell has become heaven and heaven has become hell. That is how he has begun to think, because he is not ready to accept any limitations or any kind of curb on his desires. Already conscious that he knows, or he is greater than any ordinary man, he wants to be next to God. He is dissatisfied with his mortality. And when the good angel speaks, he urges him the usual moral values. When the bad angel speaks, it seems to echo Faustus's own thoughts. And immediately Faustus listens to the words of the evil angel, the bad angel, because this is what he wants to hear. He has made his choice. In the modern day critical view, or their interpretations, that actually the good angel and the bad angel, the good angel and the evil angel, they are projections of his conscience as the struggle goes on within his mind, his soul, and his heart. But they are definitely, the presence of the elements like good angel and evil angel are remnants of religious drama. But Dr. Faustus has a very deep religious element around which the drama is built, and that is of temptation, sin, and damnation. Once bad angel has urged Faustus to listen to nothing but his own desires, again it seems that the thoughts from Faustus's mind take the shape of immortal words, full of beauty, power, expression, and loveliness. In these lines, Marlowe not only shows his exceptional talent as a poet, but he also expresses the Renaissance feeling, the feeling of enthusiasm, the feeling of excitement, because it was a new world which was opening up, the discovery of new continents and the new branches of knowledge. It seemed that there were no limits. And these beautiful lines, when Faustus once more seems to congratulate himself on thinking of what he is going to achieve once he has mastered the art of black magic and sold his soul in exchange for power. And the lines that he shall get the spirits, fetch him new treasures, travel to newfound worlds, get riches, and become the ruler of this province, which will have no boundaries. All this express the spirit of Renaissance, which was on the threshold of discovery, which found the world to be a magnificent place full of unexplored treasures, and on the whole, a very overwhelming sense of desire and the possibilities that man could attain greatness. Man was not the puny, sinful creature born into darkness and despair, as the darkness of the medieval ages had always said, but man was a creature who was created by God, who had who had the signs of immortality, who had the immortal soul, and who was among the most glorious and the greatest creatures of the world. This first scene of Act I ends on, again, words which seem to be ominous and which seem to be full of a dark prophecy and a dark meaning. The line is, "This night I'll conjure though I die, therefore." And Faustus says that I will raise the spirits of hell this night, or I will die before that. Well, he is entering a world of a spiritual death, and these lines are almost prophetic. In Act 1, Scene 2, there is again a note of irony when Faustus, who was a very popular person, who was a very revered scholar, who was very well known, who was respected, people are curious about him because he seems to be in a place where he is not a part of the public life. And then one of them asks the other, and Wagner says, ironically, God in heaven knows. Again, these lines have a double meaning. They are full of significance, they are full of irony, they are full of a dark meaning, and we can again imagine the effect it must have had in the 16th century audience to witness this on the stage and to feel the dread at the thought that here was a man who was willing to align himself with the evil and sell his soul to the devil. When we come to Scene 3, we find that Faustus is ready to conjure, he is ready to worship the evil and to raise the spirits of hell. And once Faustus has made up his mind, he is like a person who is impatient. Like everything else, he wants to have these things to happen at once. He is not ready to think over it. In fact, it almost seems that Faustus is pushing away his thoughts. He does not want to admit the truth himself. He is too intelligent a person not to realize the horror of what he is about to commit. Yet, the desire in him is so great that he cannot accept, or he is not willing to deny himself anything. He cannot practice self-control. He does not have the humility to accept his limitations. He has an intellectual arrogance. He has an arrogance which will lead him to his damnation. And this idea itself is a very Christian idea, and it is the idea of sin and damnation. This entire play is built around this idea. And so, in order to achieve the impossible, he quotes Mephistopheles and Lucifer, the agents of hell, and conjures the spirit. Mephistopheles immediately enters, and then Faustus, still full of this sense of his own power, asks Mephistopheles to change his shape. Now, another line which becomes ironical as the play moves on, it is not only the line that thou art but a man, because at the end, Faustus is willing, or he is desperate, or he is in the point of disaster when he would be anything but a man. And in the beginning, the fact that he's a man is something which fills him with dissatisfaction. One word which appears again and again, and because of the repetition, which is again a very literary device, when a word or a phrase or line is repeated again and again, it assumes other meanings than its original meaning. It assumes the meanings of irony, satire, exaggeration, and the meaning becomes more and more sinister as the words in this context of this play, as the words are repeated again and again. These words are "be resolute." In the very first scene, Faustus has asked himself to be resolute, because he says that I shall not change my mind. I am resolute that I am going to turn to necromancy, and nothing will make me change my mind. So he has used these words, "be resolute." In Act 1, Scene 3, he urges himself again to be resolute. And this "be resolute," as it is repeated again and again, points out again to the very lack of resolution, because one of the weaknesses of Dr. Faustus is that he seems to lack in determination and willpower, because whenever he is on the brink of repenting or turning back to God, it is this very lack of resolution which stops him from doing so. In Scene 2, he has told very early and confidently to Valdus that he is resolute. Resolute am I in this. And then in Scene 3, he again urges himself to be resolute. Mephistopheles enters because Faustus has made the incantation, and then Faustus, carried away by his overconfidence, because he sees that Mephistopheles has immediately come before him because of his words, he tells him to go and change his shape. And then, in almost as if he is trying to push his luck, he says in a very facetious manner, almost making fun, I see there's virtue in my heavenly words. Again, this points out to his inverted values, which is almost frightening, and it would have been horrifying to the 16th century audience. Earlier also in lines 49, he has said these necromantic books are heavenly, calling something which is hellish heavenly. Here again he says, I see there is virtue in my heavenly words. And apart from this play, Dr. Faustus, it has other unusual elements. It is a plain transition that we know, a mixture of the Greek tragedy, religious drama, and Renaissance spirit. Another factor which makes this play unusual or extraordinary is the definition of hell, and also the presence of Mephistopheles. Mephistopheles is not presented merely as a symbol of evil, Mephistopheles is presented as a suffering soul. Mephistopheles has been presented as a real character with realistic elements. These elements are visible in the words of Mephistopheles. Mephistopheles is not a completely black image of hell, but rather Mephistopheles has almost been given human aspects. This is point number one. The second point is in the definition of hell. Hell and heaven were again very symbolic, and they were actually representations of physical realities in the minds of traditional belief, and in the 16th century it would have been even more so. Hell has always and heaven have always been presented as physical realities. When Mephistopheles defines hell, it is a very modern definition. He defines hell as a state of mind. He defines hell as a continuous torture of not the body but the mind and the spirit and the soul. These two factors Mephistopheles presented not as a symbol of evil but a suffering soul, and the definition of hell not as a physical reality but a mental state are elements which are unexpected in the 16th century literature. And all these factors point out to the greatness of Marlowe's imagination. The factors of humanism in the Renaissance age, that Marlowe could define, think, imagine and present both evil and hell in this very modern manner, in these very modern terms, because certain these conceptions, these concepts, these projections or these perceptions of hell as mental states and evil as a continuous suffering, as negativity, not something totally black but with shades of grey as Mephistopheles is, because contrary to the character of evil, he tells Faustus to stop in his reckless pursuit, which will lead him to nothing but unhappiness, sorrow and damnation. It is totally uncharacteristic of a power of hell to speak so, but then these elements are illuminating, and these are the elements about Dr. Faustus which put it in the category of the greatest tragedies of all time. In fact, this conception, this perception, this projection is not even present in a 19th century poem like The Goblin Market, where black and white are two definite categories, hell and heaven, good and evil. But here the boundaries are fluid between good and evil. Mephistopheles does not come across as a totally evil symbol or projection of hell. So the definition of hell and the presence of Mephistopheles, not as a symbol but as a suffering soul, as a character with dimensions of reality, are unusual elements about Dr. Faustus. And after Mephistopheles has made himself present before Faustus, and Faustus is eager to go forward in his quest, he, again full of that blustering overconfidence, tells Mephistopheles to obey all his commands. Mephistopheles does not leave any doubts in Faustus's mind, and in a very cold, clear, precise manner, where he does not tempt Faustus, Faustus tempts himself. He says, I am a servant to great Lucifer, and may not follow thee without his leave. No more than he commands must we perform. And he tells Faustus very categorically that he obeys no one but his master, that is Lucifer. Faustus tries to hide his disappointment, and he is taken aback. We can say that his overconfidence has received a setback, and when nonplussed, he asked Mephistopheles if he did not come because Faustus's incantation or his worship or his words of black magic had this power over him and which forced him to come. Then Mephistopheles again leaves no doubt in his mind. And so we see that Mephistopheles is not the tempting agent, it is Faustus himself. Because unless one has this desire, this flaw, this weakness in one's character, nothing can make us do something which we don't want to. And then Faustus still persisting, he says, wasn't my conjuring speech, my words which made you come? Mephistopheles again in a very cold, in a very ominous manner says, that was the cause, yet per accident. For when we hear one rack the name of God, abjure the scriptures and his Saviour Christ, we fly in hope to get his glorious soul. Nor will we come unless he use such means, whereby he is in danger to be damned. Therefore the shortest route cut for conjuring is stoutly to abjure all godliness and pray devoutly to the prince of hell. And so he tells Faustus that the only reason he is there is because they go wherever there is a possibility of a soul leaning or reaching for damnation and destruction. Faustus chooses to ignore the real meaning of his words. Again, this is Faustus's foolhardiness and his lack of resolution, that he chooses to ignore the warning signs. And again with the same kind of reckless, uncaring attitude, though he is too intelligent not to understand that he is trying to convince only himself in a very foolish manner, and what he knows in his heart, what he is saying is not the truth. And so, in spite of Mephistopheles' words, which do not leave any doubt in his mind, he still goes ahead and says, though this word damnation terrifies not him, for he confounds hell in Elysium. His ghost be with the old philosophers, but leaving these vain trifles of men's souls, tell me what is that, Lucifer thy Lord? And then he uses words like vain trifles, because he is trying to ignore the real meaning. He is trying to shut his eyes to the truth. And the most priceless gift of God, that is the immortal soul, he calls the vain trifles, because his values are inverted. And then he persists in his queries. He says, who is Lucifer? Again, Mephistopheles' words leave no doubt in his mind. Faustus, was not that Lucifer an angel once? Yes, Faustus, and most dearly loved of God. And then when Faustus asks why they are known, or why Lucifer is known as the prince of devils, Mephistopheles again says, oh, by aspiring pride and insolence, for which God threw him from the face of heaven. And he says, he tells about his ongoing torture in very clear words. When Faustus says, who are you that live with Lucifer? Unhappy spirits that fell with Lucifer, conspired against our God with Lucifer, and are forever damned with Lucifer. The impact, the import, the meaning, the truth of these words could not have escaped Faustus. But he again chooses deliberately to ignore the real meaning. And in the same light-hearted vein, as if he did not care or he did not want to accept the truth of these words, he says, where are you damned? In hell. How come it then that thou art out of hell? And then he receives a reply which chills him, but still he persists. And this definition of hell is one of the most eloquent lines written in English literature. Again, very modern definition of hell. An interpretation of hell not as something physical, not as something which is in a definite place, but something which is inescapable.